from there, inshallah. So let me start. Bismillah. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. I wanted to start very quickly by just reading a very quick dua so that we can start our Friday sessions and hopefully try to contain them between 20 and 30 minutes. So let's say a couple words before we start into the topic. Allahumma lakal hamdu anta nuru samawati wal ard wa lakal hamdu anta khayyimu samawati wal ard wa lakal hamdu anta rabbis samawati wal ard wa man fihin أنت الحق وقولك الحق ووعدك الحق ولقاؤك الحق والجنة حق والنار حق والنبيون حق والساعة حق اللهم لك أسلمنا وبك آمنا وعليك توكلنا وعليك أنبنا وبك خاصمنا وإليك حاكمنا فاغفر لنا ما قدمنا وما أخرنا وما أسررنا وما أعلنا أنت إلهي لا إله إلا أنت. So all thanks are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I would like to thank the Birmingham Islamic Society for providing us this excellent forum during this pandemic and to bring this short program to our community. And a special thanks to our family, Dr. Mahbul Patel and his family, for helping in providing this technical support. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless, to guard, to guide, to support and grant us all the very best of deen, dunya and akhirah. So let me begin by giving a very quick disclaimer. As you all know, I am a student of knowledge and by no means a person who can really extrapolate this wonderful intrinsic knowledge that's available to one and all and to all of us who seek to find it and who seek to locate it. So I should begin really by reminding myself of one of the acronyms we had coined pre-pandemic times prior to this pandemic that is affecting all of us. And those acronyms were basically I followed by 3 T's. And we coined it as the ITTT. And this is also a kind of a homework for those of our listening audience. So the first I stands for Iqra. Those of us from the subcontinent, we are familiar with this Iqra because when our children get to be at a point where they are when they are at an age when they can read, we then ask them to start with this particular verse of the Quran, Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq. So the first I is Iqra, and then followed by 3 T's. And so if you don't remember anything else that I will say today, remember this acronym, I followed by 3 T's, ITTT. The next T is tartil, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. And followed by the next T, which is حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ, and that is tilawa. And the last T, which is يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, do you not consider this Quran with care? So Iqra, tartil, tilawa, and tadabbur. I would like for our audience to actually go back and find out what verses and what chapters of the Quran these came from. So this will be your homework, and in the comment section you can go ahead and put your comments that you found this in this chapter and this verse, inshallah. Now recently I was sent a segment of a video from an Indian movie. And it was very interesting because it was titled, the movie was entitled 3 Idiots. And a student in that movie was asked to give the definition of a machine. So this student explained it in pretty practical and layman terms that this is what a machine is and this is what it does. The teacher was very upset and offended that the student did not give a textbook answer. And this really led me to talk about today's topic because I realized that we are living in a world completely different than the one that we faced last year. And so in this reference, I wanted to talk about 2 areas that we ought to pay attention to in our daily lives. As creatures that have been described as Ashraful Makhlukhat, the highest of creation. We humans take pride in our most inimitable skills and abilities that distinguish us from all other realms of creation. And most outstanding is that our intellectual abilities and mental faculties. Man, however, is a multidimensional creature who has both positive as well as negative attributes. So the Arabic word that corresponds in a human being is insan. This word takes its root from the word nisyan, which literally means forgetfulness. Man is undeniably a very forgetful creature. And this trait of forgetfulness has two sides in it. There's a good side and then there is a bad side. And so I wanted to show you how forgetfulness can be a blessing for us. And one of the imams and one of the teachers said that no matter how this degree of forgetfulness is inside your intellect, it says a higher degree of forgetfulness is the one that can ruin one's life as well as the afterlife, the permanent abode. So this is definitely the kind of forgetfulness that one should try to keep away by all means. It distances one from Allah and His special servants and leaves one in the state of absolute desolation. Our Prophet ﷺ, may the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon him and his progeny, he said that every child is born on fitrah, the innate disposition towards the truth. And it is his parents who make him a Jew or a Christian or a Hindu or whatever. This tells us that Islam is a religion that is built within our very existence, and ignorance towards it is an outcome of forgetfulness. And one of the scholars, he said that if the imperious self and the animal self took over control of bodily affairs, the wisdom and human self are subdued and become isolated, in which case a man or a woman gradually takes distance from Allah and human values, ultimately falling into a deep and dark valley of ignorance. He or she forgets his humanity and recognizes in its place the unconscious self, which is animalism. Therefore, forgetfulness of Allah and eventually of ourselves is the result we see when the spiritual and human self of man loses against his animal self. Most, if not all, of the parts I will talk about today are excerpts from the authors such as Imam Ghazali and the more recent ones such as Khurram Murad, Hamza Yusuf, Zaid Shakir, and also from the past from Sheikh Ahmed Zarruq. So to start this topic, allow me to break it up into short segments, and this would help us understand this better. I will start this introduction by talking about three items that are prominent in my thought process. Number one, the current state. What is our current state? And the need to achieve taqwa. And why do I need to say that? And number two, the transformations. How do we transform ourselves inwardly and outwardly? And last but not the least, our family and the importance of our family. So let me start, Bismillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah, that we understand Islam is submitting to reality. It is a recognition and an acceptance of the way things really are, and not as they appear. Everything is in submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the real, who is al-haq, and only humankind and willful spirits, the jinn, can rebel against our Creator. Over 1400 years ago, this path of Islam was renewed to mark the entry into the last phase of human experience on earth. It was renewed by the best of creation, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and his progeny. And he was the final prophet, and the seal of Allah's prophets, upon them all be peace. He was its greatest sojourner, and he never deviated from its course. His blessed footprints remain clear and unchanged for anyone desiring to set out on that ancient prophetic path. So, what I wanted to talk about is how then is this concept of taqwa so important to us, and how do we do this? And as I was going through this journey, one of the verses that I looked up was in Surah Al-Baqarah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nasu a'budu rabbakum alladhi khalaqakum walladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. O humanity, worship your Lord who created you and those before you in order for you to realize taqwa. And when I looked at this, the tafsir is pretty long, but I'm gonna give you a couple of highlights because this verse, the second verse of this particular ayah that I talked about from Surah Al-Baqarah, provides the answer to the prayer made in Surah Fatiha. In Surah Fatiha, when we say Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, guide us in the straight path, that is to say, the guidance man has prayed for is present in this book. That is to say, the guidance man has prayed for is in this book. The Holy Quran is from the beginning to the end a detailed account of this straight path. Then the surah proceeds to divide men and women into three groups according to whether they accept the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from this book. And these three verses speak of the true and God-fearing Muslims who not only accept but also act upon this guidance, and the next two verses of those disbelievers who oppose it. And that is why I read this particular verse, and it is from Surah Al-Baqarah. And in this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, it is verse number 21 in Surah Al-Baqarah. And in the tafsir, what I was reading was so interesting. I wanted to read it for you because I think it makes a lot of sense. The sentence is addressed to all three groups of men and women. For each, it has a different meaning. Number one, worship your Lord. The phrase calls upon the disbelievers to give up worshipping created beings and in turn to the Creator. It asks the hypocrites to be sincere and true in their faith. It commands the sinning Muslims to change their ways and try to be perfect in their obedience to Allah. And it encourages the God-fearing Muslims to be steadfast in their worship and obedience and make a greater effort in the way of Allah. And this last sentence really was so profound, it led me to research this a lot more than I would have, because this is the reason why you and I are here in this little small town of Birmingham, trying to understand the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and put them in a way that you and I can benefit from this. So we, inshallah, from amongst those last category, that we will be steadfast in our worship and in obedience, and we will make a greater effort in the way towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, that we call upon Him so many times every single prayer. So I was going to tell you that this is the first prohibition that I read after I read this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the very next verse tells us, فَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ, and do not set up false deities besides Allah, you are aware of what you are doing. And when I read this and I understood this, this gave me an idea that you and I run after so many things in this dunya life, and we need to get back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's many other verses that I will skip for now, but I wanted to run quickly in the next 5-10 minutes that I have got left, that what is our current state and what is the need to achieve taqwa. Now the state of the people of this ancient path is deplorable. Generally speaking, we are powerless, bereft morally and bankrupt morally, objects of history rather than subjects of history. And this is where we are post the 1900s, when we did everything prior to that according to the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and accordance to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then our condition is far from that of our noble forebearers. It is as if we never recited or ever heard the prayer of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he recited every morning. Every morning the Prophet would recite, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazan wal-ajzi wal-kasal wal-jubni wal-bukhal wal-dala'i ad-dain wa-ghalabat al-rajal wa-ghalabat al-rajal. O Allah, I seek refuge in you from grief and anxiety, And O Allah, I seek refuge in you from impotence and indolence, and from cowardice, and from miserliness, and from being overcome by debt and overpowered by men. So now the question arises, how did we reach this state? And before responding to this question, we should ask a more important one. How do we get out of this state? And that's the journey that I would like to take us on in the next few weeks or few months, depending on how much information we can get. And the answers to both these questions, and I'll be honest with you, are painful and they are complex. However, we can bypass all of the ramifications of both the answers and arrive at a simple yet profound summative response if we understand one verse from the Quran, which really shook my foundations when I was starting to write this, because the verse that I read is in Surah Al-Ra'd, and the chapter is 13, and the verse number is 11, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah does not change a people until they change what is in themselves. And I will not get into the tafsir, although I did go through the Ma'arif al-Quran. I find it amazing that this book of Allah is in our libraries. Every one of us probably carries more than one copy of this, and we need to really change that by picking up this book of Allah and reading it. I will very quickly try to summarize what I wanted to say, because I have probably less than 3 minutes left, and I had at least 3 more pages or 4 more pages that I wanted to cover, but inshallah we'll cover that another time. But I will tell you this. Imam Abu Talib al-Makki, in the book called The Nourishment of the Heart, he said the beauty of this verse is that it comprises a twofold meaning. First, it means that Allah does not remove blessings that He has bestowed upon a people until they transgress from the obedience to disobedience. This is the response to our first question. We are in this state because of our disobedience. In other words, we exchanged guidance for misguidance, and Allah left us to fend for ourselves. The second meaning of this verse is that Allah does not change a people's outward state of abasement, humiliation, and abjection until they change what is in themselves. This answers our second question. To get out of this state, we must consciously move from one state of disobedience to a state of obedience. We must recognize that Allah gave us guidance through the messengers. And I am going to stop at this point and inshallah make a quick dua that we'll get back to this every Friday and hopefully summarize this in the best of ways inshallah. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا وأنت التواب الرحيم. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار يا عزيز يا غفار. صلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.